global map? Are we going to run through like teaching the members what detail going on with it, what is the strategies, how we plan it to do more battles to get better into it, what we're gonna do?
That may
Guys,
be
clear comms. That's not a conversation for the training room. That's a conversation for outside the training room. Alright, so I would like everyone to meet in E and F5, approximately that part of the map.
Here we go!
Alright, so we are all here to do ballistics training. So the first thing that we're going to be covering is armor angling. Feel free to ask your question now, Smiley.
No, my question was, if I have a question about something that you said, do I ask in chat? Or do I message you in TeamSpeak through a private message, or...
Type it in the in-game chat.
Okay.
Type it in the in-game chat to all, not just to your team or platoon.
Okay.
Yes. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to discuss is armor angling. So armor angling is a technique that is done to increase the effective thickness of your armor. So, looking at the IS-3, I believe that it has approximately 100 millimeters of frontal armor. Is that correct, Cronus?
I think it's a little bit more than that. Let me check.
I can pull up Tank Inspector real quick.
That would be even better.
Has the training room started?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
IS-3 frontal armor is...
Just focus on the upper slope for now.
There's up, I'll pull it up, going over to the Russian.
There's still time to get in on the training, or have you guys already moved to the map?
We're in it.
If
Yeah,
you're
we moved
facing
to the
it,
map.
if you're facing it front on, then you're
No,
gonna have...
I'm just looking for the thickness of the plate. And Smiley is saying that's 130 millimeters.
Yeah, go with that. I was thinking about effective thickness.
So, the IS-3 frontal armor has a nominal thickness of 130 millimeters. That's the thickness of the metal plate itself. So, with that information, Gibson or Colt or even the Cromwells should be able to penetrate that armor if it were just a flat surface. However, since the IS-3's armor is angled pretty heavily, the effective thickness of the armor is increased. So, that means that 130 millimeters of penetration is no longer enough to punch through the front of an IS-3. Now, the IS-3's armor is pre-angled, which means that the best way for it to face an opponent is directly head-on, and that if he were to angle himself at an enemy, the effective armor would actually decrease. However, tanks that have mostly flat frontal plates, like the KV-1, the VK-3001P, etc., and yep, the KV-2, and tanks that have frontal plates that are just angled backwards. So that would be the Sherman, the EZ-2, etc., can benefit from actually turning their armor in order to increase the effective thickness. So now we're going to talk just very briefly about a game mechanic called Overmatch. Overmatch is an increase in the penetration of a shell if the shell's caliber is twice the thickness of the armor that it's going up against. So an example would be a 90mm shell coming up against 40mm of armor. So the 90mm shell will experience increased penetration. If the shell's caliber is 3 times the thickness of the armor, so, for example, a 90mm shell against 30mm of armor, the shell will penetrate regardless of the angle that the shell impacts the target. So, one more thing to mention before we move on to specific shell types is ricochets. A ricochet will occur if a shell, if an AP shell or an APCR shell hits a tank at a very extreme angle. So for AP shells, I believe the angle is 70 degrees, and for APCR shells, I believe the angle is 80 degrees. So that's why, if you're in a tank with very thin armor, you can sometimes get lucky bounces against other tanks. Now, yes, Micah, go ahead.
You were talking about overmatched is ×2 and how ×3 is different from ×2. What is overmatching? What do you benefit from overmatching?
You don't have to aim.
So, if you aren't fully overmatching, so if you don't have if your shell's caliber is not 3 times the thickness of the armor.
2 times. I don't understand the 3 times. There's overmatching. You don't have to have any angle on the armor, specifically. Won't ricochet.
Right. If your shell's caliber is between 2 and 3 times, it will increase the effective penetration of the round.
Okay, I thought you were making a difference between ×2 and ×3. Never mind.
Okay.
I think the essential shortcut of the overmatch is essentially the shell is so large and so heavy, the armor cannot redirect its kinetic energy, so it just punches right through regardless of how the armor's angled, and that's what overmatch means.
Yes. So if you do have a gun that 3 times overmatches your target, you will never have a ricochet. The shell will penetrate no matter what angle you hit the target at. Yes, Smiley, go ahead.
Sorry, but...
No, that's actually wrong.
So, you were talking about overmatching, so say, like, how the ISU 152 its gun is so big that, say, if a T-150 was side-scraping, it would pen through its side. Is that what overmatching is?
Sorry. In that case, it depends on the type of shell that you're using, which I will get into in a second.
Sorry, can I get an invite to the room?
We're currently in battle.
Also, Mustang said something. What were you saying?
I posted it in chat for you.
Okay.
But
can I ask a question, or?
regardless of overmatch, you can still ricochet. That's what ricochet angles are.
However, the 3 times, if the caliber is 3 times the thickness of the armor, no ricochet will happen.
Yep.
Yeah, which is what I was saying.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Isn't 70 degrees an auto bounce? Or does it not count if it's 3 times? Like, I heard, because of like, if the tank was side scraping at 70 degrees and you hit their side, does it not just auto bounce anyway? Without even calculating penetration?
It will not auto bounce if the caliber of the shell that you are being hit with is 3 times greater than the thickness of your armor.
So that means, sorry, question.
Yes, go ahead.
So that means if I was going up against a Cromwell and I was side scraping around a corner, I had my armor at over 70 degrees and he fired a shot, he would bounce, right?
If it's 70 degrees at the spot he hit you. Or it has to be higher than 70 degrees, it has to be 71 or higher.
But if he was using something like the 3.7-inch howitzer with HE, it wouldn't bounce regardless of when I scraped out.
So that comes down to what rounds are capable of overmatching.
I believe HE just explodes on the outside of it automatically.
Yes, HE ammunition does not overmatch armor.
But it has to be 85 degrees for heat rounds. AP and APCR are 70 degrees.
Alright, so now we're going to move on to ammunition types.
I actually do have a quick question, real quick.
Go ahead.
If that's alright. Alright, thanks. Does this happen to tanks in the same tier, or a similar tier? Or is it only versus like a scout tank that's 2 tiers lower than you or something?
It can happen to any tank in any tier.
So there are like medium tanks that get penetrated by like a big gun. Same tier?
Yep.
Okay. Alright, thank you.
Alright, so AP, or armor-piercing ammunition, is the standard ammunition on most guns. AP shells will lose some penetration if you are firing at extreme ranges. So, I believe that would be greater than 100 meters. You start to experience penetration fall off. AP shells are capable of overmatching armor. And AP shells are a good shell to use for general use in most tanks.
User joined your channel.
The second type of ammunition that we have is APCR. So APCR shells have higher penetration than AP shells from the same gun. However, APCR shells will lose penetration more quickly over distance than an AP shell will. Usually I would recommend loading a few APCR shells on your tanks in order to achieve a penetration when it is absolutely necessary to do so. So now we move on to the explosive ammunition. So we'll start with high explosive, or HE. HE shells will do high damage if they penetrate the target.
User left your channel.
And will also sometimes do lower damage even if they do not penetrate the target. HE shells do not lose penetration over distance. However, they tend to be used on guns with lower velocities. So that would be your howitzers, which are available on the KV-2 and the M4 Sherman.
And the new Japanese one comes out.
HE shells will not lose any penetration over distance. So if you are firing at 400 meters, your penetration on an HE shell will be the same as if you're firing at point blank. And in general, HE shells are a good choice on guns that have a low velocity, even if AP shells are available. So an example of a gun like that would be the 105 on the VK2801, which does have AP available. However, the AP penetration is quite low. So, lastly, we're going to move on to heat ammunition, or high explosive anti-tank. Heat shells also do not lose penetration over distance. They tend to have very high penetration compared to AP or HE. However, you have to be careful about where you fire your heat shells so that you don't hit spaced armor. Heat shells will not go through spaced armor.
And you can abuse that when you get higher tier people slinging heat. You can laugh at them and abuse the snot out of it.
Yeah, so I'll get to you in a second, Smiley, but spaced armor on tanks will frequently be the tracks and the turret mantlet. Occasionally you will find it in other parts of the tank. Examples of this would be the Panzer IV-H, which has some spaced armor on the turret, and the Super Pershing, which has spaced armor on the front of the hull. So, Smiley, what was your question?
Okay, so 2 questions actually, but why won't heat go through spaced armor? Is the first question.
The detonation mechanics of the round.
What happens is it hits the first lighter piece of armor. It spends a lot of its energy going through that, and when it hits the under armor, which is generally set off from the space, the outer armor is offset from the inner armor by a distance of inches, and when the round hits the first layer of armor, it expends a lot of its energy, and it explodes prematurely, and so therefore doesn't penetrate the second layer of armor.
You can still pen with heat rounds, though. What it typically does is it changes, like, when you look at the side of an IS-3 or an IS-7, it looks flat, but if you take off the space armor, it's actually a really sharp point angle, like the front of the tank. So that way it deflects the shell down or upwards so that it doesn't penetrate the interior, but it can still go through the space, deflect down, and still blow up part of the tank and actually do damage. It's just highly unlikely because they'll typically explode after the first layer of armor.
And then my second question is, does the IS-7 or the T-95 have spaced armor? I think they do, but I'm not sure.
T-95 doesn't, but the IS-5 IS-7 has a lot of spaced armor.
Yes, NYC fan, go ahead.
It's Lawrence, but okay. But anyhow, I was wondering, where does HESH kind of high explosive squash head play into this?
So HESH behaves like a high penetration, high explosive round. if I recall correctly, it has or it suffers from the same disadvantages of high explosive, but also has the same advantages, meaning that, it does not lose penetration over distance, and it can do some damage even if it fails to penetrate. However, Hesh also does not do well if shot at spaced armor.
Well, last question. With Hesh, though, I have heard, though, that even if it does explode near a target, it still has a splash radius like high explosive. Is that true?
Yeah, well, Hesh rounds were never designed to penetrate. Hesh rounds, the reason they have a high penetration value in the game is because what Hesh rounds actually do is they explode on the outside of the tank and they shockwave through armor. So that's why, like a Death Star, when it shoots with a Hesh round, if the round explodes on the outside, it can still do like 400 or 500 damage. But if it pens, then the shockwave will blow up on the inside, and that's generally why it does like so much damage, like 1800 damage, because a shockwave blowing on the inside of a tank kills everything.
Right. The actual physical process that happens is when the shockwave hits the inside edge of the armor, it shatters parts of the armor, and it sends pieces of metal flying all around the inside of the tank.
Spall. That's why they have spall liners for some tanks.
Exactly.
High explosive doesn't do much damage, but it do more critical hits and them sort of thing then.
It's just high explosive technically does the most damage, but it rarely pens that way. Typically the only things that fire high explosive are being fired at like low tiers to other low tier tanks, or out of artillery, because they're penning like the engine decks or open top tanks where the high explosive shell will just fall inside the tank and blow it up.
Well, at mid to high tiers, just tier 8 and up, you've got a lot of fast tanks with no armor where HE is highly viable compared to AP or APCR.
Yeah, typically against light tanks. The other tanks that I fire HE at are like the Waffle series. Fire it because you'll break their gun almost every time, and then that causes them to have to repair their gun to shoot you.
Alright, Smiley, did you have another question?
Yeah, so did you say that HE doesn't lose its power over a distance? Like
Correct.
If you shoot it, like how much does APCR lose power, and how much power does AP lose over a distance?
So the actual loss in penetrating power for an AP or an APCR round depends on the caliber of the gun. So I can't give you exact numbers on that. However, again, HE, Hesh, and Heat do not lose any penetrating power over distance.
So APCR does lose penetrating power over a distance, just like AP?
Yes.
Welcome.
Alright.
One point to make, please.
Yep, go ahead.
Your HE rounds are good. Accuracy at distance tends to go way off the spectrum, too.
Yeah.
Oops.
Well, like if you're firing like an E100 across the map against a target, it will hit where you're pointing if the RNG allows the shot to fly straight. It's just that it takes a lob shot because the shell has a low velocity. So the shell has to curve curve through the air to get there. So if you're shooting it like people through a window, you might just hit the window ceiling the entire time and never actually hit the tank because the shell can't drop through the window.
Okay, I think Micah had a question.
Yes, does shell velocity have an effect on range and loss of penetration?
Yeah.
Yes. Some low-tier guns are actually hard capped at a certain range. An example of this would be the Lux and the Leopard. Their auto guns are capped at, I believe, 400 meters.
What does that mean?
It means that even if your shell is going towards the target on a correct trajectory, it won't actually hit the target and do damage.
Okay.
Epic Smiley, what is your question?
Is it possible, since we're talking about angling and shells, to, like, for certain situations, is it possible to bounce off of one tank and hit another tank and do damage to the other tank?
Yes.
It is, yeah.
Really want to do that now.
There's one video of an RD shooting at a light tank approaching, bounces off the light tanks and kills another RD on the other side of the map.
You saw that from that RNG episode, right?
So bounces happen. But that's only, I think, since 9.1 or 9.2.
Yes, that's also
and
only
Quixotic,
with...
me and another person are waiting in the lobby, just to let you know.
AP.
I kind of missed the invite.
Yeah, this was mostly a lecture training.
Yeah, I've been just listening.
Yeah.
It will be posted on YouTube tonight if anybody that missed it. Be posted up by tomorrow, but I'm recording it right now.
So, getting back to the question of ricocheting off another tank, or ricocheting off of one tank and hitting another, again, that will only work on AP and APCR shells. HE will explode on impact, as will heat and HESH. So you will only get those ricochets when firing AP and APCR.
Heat can ricochet off and hit another tank. If it's at 85 degrees or more, the heat round can still ricochet off of it and hit.
Because of its armor penetrating nature.
It won't lose any penetration value either, which is the scary part when it ricochets off. So, but I've had it where I fired my E100 in Clan Wars and it ricocheted off an enemy tank back into one of my own tanks and penned, which is complete tardism.
Okay. That I did not know, so thank you for that, Mustang. Cronus, go ahead with your question.
Is it possible, if I'm shooting HE at a very heavily armored target, that it hits it and does not do any damage?
Yes. So the damage that HE will do if it does not penetrate the target is dependent on the thickness of the armor on that tank. So heavily armored targets will, in fact, take no damage from low damage HE rounds.
May I add?
It also depends on the caliber of gun.
Yeah.
Like, for example, this doesn't happen in game, but the howitzer on the M4 firing at, say, a mouse. The heat shell is going to explode, but it's not going to do any damage.
No, I wasn't a match. The question why I asked this question, I wasn't a match where the target was very low health and very well armored, so I decided to load HE, take him out. He only had like 30 some health, and the game reported it as, the commander or the gunner will say, it penetrated. It actually said it bounced. Is that possible as well? Bouncing an HE? Because that's what the game reported it as.
If the armor angle is extreme enough, yes, you can bounce HE, but it's got to be extreme. Like facing E100 face on, and he turns his turret slightly and you graze the side of it, you'll bounce off.
Okay. Epic Mods has a question.
Yeah, aren't there tanks with like shot traps, like the E2? Like you bounce off the mantlet, and then it just goes straight into the crew hatch. I don't know if there's any other tanks that do that.
Can I answer this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, we're not match anymore, but if you look at the front of that IS-3, there is a classic shot trap. First off, right directly underneath the gun mantlet. If you fire underneath the gun, you have a chance of going underneath the turret, damaging the turret ring, and perhaps damaging crew. And those two spare track sections on the front of that tank are wonderful shot traps, because if you hit those, the round will not bounce off of that pike nose and go right through. So there are many tanks with shot traps, and they're easy to spot. You look at a tank that's got upward angled armor around the turret or other sections of the vehicle where it won't direct the round toward an area. Like if you shoot the side of the IS-3, its under armor is going to direct the round down into the ground ineffectively. But some have turrets that are like that, where your round will hit that angle and go down into the top hull of the vehicle that has, well, no armor to speak of.
Kind of like the shot trap on the machine gun port for the T-14.
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, and the Tortoise has a classic shot trap. The gun itself, you shoot directly down the gun. If you get around the gun's base, it's a shot trap that'll pull it right into the vehicle.
Question.
Yep, go ahead.
Doesn't the EA shot trap with the same mantlet?
No, the E8 has a different turret mounted on it. It does not have the shot trap.
I thought that the mantlet looked similar, that's why I was asking.
Nope. The EZ2 stock turret is the one with the shot trap. The upgraded turret does not, on the E2, does not have the shot trap, and the turret on the EZ8, which is the same as the upgraded EZ2 turret, also does not have the shot trap.
Please send Mustang an invite.
Actually,
I'm waiting in
I think
the lobby
we're going to be wrapping up. Like I said, this was mostly a lecture training.
Well, we'll keep everybody in the same training room for the next training. But, yeah.
Question.
Yep, go ahead.
Today's code.
After the training's complete.
Okay.
Unless somebody has to go for other reasons.
Who's hot miking?
Gibson.